It was the first thing that I've ever really, truly sat down and contemplated quitting. 100%. It was like, I'd never really truly said, like, I'm going to quit. Hey everyone, I've been saying for a long time that I was going to do a video about my CCIE journey, and I've decided to stop putting it off and just get it done. What you can see here on the screen are the results for my first attempt at the lab. In total, it took me 5 attempts to pass the exam. 5 attempts just at the lab, not including the written. And when I did pass the written, I passed it dead right on the head. I think I needed 825 points to pass the exam, and I got exactly 825 points on the written. But as you can see here on the lab exam, my results were awful. In fact, I bombed this exam so bad that the proctor at the end of my 5th attempt said to me, "How about that first attempt?" You know, by that time we kind of knew each other a little better. We had seen each other enough times, and we knew enough of the same people that over time we began to start actually talking. Never anything, unprofessional. It was always very professional. He was a very good proctor in terms of maintaining a professional posture with the candidates. But, finally he was like, "Hey, how about that first attempt?" And I kind of just started laughing. And he was like, that was pretty bad. You only got about like 7 points out of 100 on that. And, looking here, very clearly, it says that I failed the exam. I sure did. And when you look at these different sections, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different sections, and 5 of them are zeros. Just flat out, you didn't even get a single point. But anyway, in this video, I'll be talking about how I got from these terrible scores all the way to the point of having my own plaque, my own CCIE, my own number. It doesn't matter if my exam, if my certification expires, I will always have that number. That number will be mine. I'll also be talking about some of the study resources I've used, the importance of having a mentor, the impact that comes with having a study partner, which was a positive impact, and some of the difficulties that I was facing when studying for this exam, because, a lot of people out there say, I'm not going to go for the exam because of X, or, it just doesn't work for me because of Y. In fact, the other day I was talking to someone. I was kind of a third wheel in a conversation, just listening in on it. And the person was explaining why they never went for the CCIE before they went into management. And what they had said was that they were already married and they had kids. And then they realized that I was there. And when I went through the exam, I was married, I had kids. So they go, which Patrick would say is not a valid excuse, right? So I'll just jump into it. And I'm going to start all the way back to when I first started doing anything technical. I didn't have any certifications. I got a job doing technical work. And I got started off in a training program where I was lucky enough to be able to attend a CCN, or it was called Interconnecting Network Devices. That was the name of the course. It was essentially a CCNA course, but it got a little bit further along than just CCNA level material. And the following week, I went to another instructor-led course, which was the CCNA X Bootcamp, which was a deep dive with an instructor named Keith Barker, which I believe is now an I&E instructor. Very good instructor. Both of the instructors for the courses that I went to were very good. And then I had a deadline for passing the CCNA routing switch. That exam took me 5 attempts. So I guess that 5 attempts is my number, since it was 5 attempts for the CCIE lab. And what I ended up doing was I would fail it and I would immediately schedule it. And then I'd fail it and immediately schedule it and fail it and immediately schedule it. And all the while I was just studying and studying and studying and looking at my test results and taking the exam again and again and again. And eventually I brute forced it and I passed the exam. So shortly after that, I had to get the CCNA voice. And I passed that exam a little bit more easily than I passed the CCNA routing and switching. And that was also another requirement. I had to pass that while I was in the program. Shortly after, I graduated the program and I moved on to a team where I was actually doing Cisco Unified Communications, primarily just voice. It was voice gateways, voicemail, CUCM, PRIs interfacing with the telco, having to call up the telco and work with them on issues, stuff like that. All the while, I started going for my CCNP. Now, important note, time, and that's the way to do it. You have to protect your time. What they mean by that is you have to say, this is my time, and I'm going to make sure that I go and do that time. So if somebody comes to me and says, hey, do you want to go out and get some beers after work? Or do you want to go and go for a run? Or do you want to do X, Y, or Z, or whatever it might be? Do you want to have a timeout? Hey, we're going to go do this. You have to protect that time from yourself, right? And from other people. And say, I'm sorry, I can't go. This is my time for studying for my exam. And the way that I did it was I would get into work crazy early in the morning. I would get to work well before I had to actually be at work. And I would go find a privacy room. And I would just sit in the privacy room and start reading and doing labs and writing things up on the dry erase board and going through and just really, really, really learning it. And then I would also I'd bring my lunch to work every day. And what I would do is take a lunch and go find another privacy room. And I would eat my lunch, and all the while I'd be watching videos and reading more of the book and, really getting into it, studying, labbing. Eventually, I got my CCNP voice. And, there were times where I would be talking to people. And I distinctly remember one time specifically I was talking about device mobility, and somebody heard me talking about it and they go, hey, are you studying for your CCIE? At the time I wasn't. So I said, no, I'm not studying for it. They're like, well, that's interesting because the topics that you're talking about are CCIE topics. Like, I'm studying that stuff right now. So that was the first time that I really started thinking, like, maybe I should go for the CCIE, because I've already been studying the topics. Why not just keep the ball rolling? The thing is, though, when I started my when I finally got my CCNP, at that point, I was in a new position, and this position was so difficult that I was constantly having to read documentation. I was constantly having to go into the lab and set things up and reproduce issues and see if I could figure out what the problems were and stuff like that. So I didn't really have time to go for the CCIE, but I was still setting things up, like making my own pods and stuff like that. And in fact, I had a manager come by who had previously been an engineer, and they saw my rack and they were like, are you going for your CCIE? And I said, no, not going for the CCIE. But again, it put the thought in my head that maybe I should be going for my CCIE. Eventually, one of my friends passed his CCIE collaboration, which is the field that I work in. And so it kind of made me start feeling more like I should go for my CCIE. And the next thing I know, a year later, another friend passes. And shortly after that, another friend. And shortly after that, another friend. So then I was really feeling the pressure, like, man, I should go get my CCIE. And I had the discussion with my wife a couple different times. I had brought it up to her, and I was telling her how difficult it was. Now, this brings me to another very important point that I wanted to tell anyone who's going to go after their CCIE. If you're in a relationship, if you have a girlfriend, a boyfriend, any significant other, you're married, whatever it might be, if you have other people in your life that depend on you to help them with things, whatever it might be, let them know about the term CCIE widow. right? That's something that somebody mentioned to me well before I didn't even have my CCNA yet, and I had heard about CCIE widows. And basically, what it is that you lose your significant other once they start studying for the CCIE. If they are truly committed, and if they really truly want to pass the exam, and they fully are committed, I'm going to pass it, and they start putting in the work, doing the labbing, reading, interacting with other people, taking the exams, it's a real deal. You got to have buy-in. It's not only a commitment from yourself, it's a commitment from the other people in your life that, have relationships with you. Now, my wife was awesome about that. She fully committed with me. There were a lot of times where I would come home from work and she would have the dinner just there for me, already made me a plate and everything. I'd eat and I'd go straight into studying. And then it was time to put the kids to bed, so I'd join her for that, reading books, doing whatever, do our bedtime routine, and then I was going right back to studying. And there were a couple times where I pulled all-nighters. There was a lot of time on the weekends that was committed to studying, so that was time lost some more between my wife and I and my kids and I. And that went on for a year of doing that. It was actually, eventually it becomes your lifestyle. It just becomes something that you're used to. But at first, it's very hard to get to that point. So again, CCIE widows, just letting your significant others, letting your friends and other family know, like, I am pretty much going to be, in blackout mode for a while. You're not going to hear from me as much. I'm getting into this. I'm going to do it. All right. So finally, my wife and I both decide, yeah, let's go for it. When I started studying for the lab, it was in January, because I had passed my CCIE written in January. But before then, I was already gathering all the gear, all the hardware that I could get to build out my CCIE rack. I didn't want to put that off waiting to pass the written. I wanted to be able to dive straight into taking, preparing for the lab. Well, that was a learning curve for me, a big learning curve, because I'd never even touched a server. Like, I've done stuff like setting things up in VMware and stuff like that, but I'd never actually got a server to boot. I never went and put RAM in the server and put in CPU and doing all of that. So the first time that I ever booted up the UCS, it was kind of funny. I couldn't figure out what the problem was, so I reached out to a friend that supports Cisco UCSs, and very quickly they identified that I didn't have a operating system. I hadn't installed ESXi or anything on there, so they were like, hey, you idiot, like, you got to actually make it have some software to run before it fully boots up. So that's how little I knew about that. There will be learning curves. Setting up your lab, all of that's going to be very difficult. It's going to be very time consuming. It's going to be a headache. You don't want to be wasting your time on it, but you have to put the time in there. You have to build out. You don't have to build out your own rack, but it is super beneficial if you build out your own rack. You get your hands on, you learn it better. You're far more familiar with the pod, and it really is just allows you to grow. I learned a lot about the UCS. I learned a lot more about ESXi, setting up networks in there, doing things with the vSwitch, all of that. I did learn a lot. So I got that all set up, and I got my lab set up. 3 months into studying for the exam, my youngest child was diagnosed with autism. While we got him involved with early intervention and ABA and all that other good stuff that I don't think most people know what any of it means, but basically he was getting services, and people were there to help him with developing his social skills and stuff like that. Well, they eventually said, you might want to have your older son checked out as well, who, in the end was also diagnosed with autism. Both of them are great kids. We love them very much. They're high functioning. All of that, right? That's not the point of why I'm bringing this up. Basically, I'm just bringing it up to say, hey, another hardship comes along, something that we have to deal with, a new thing that we have to try to navigate and figure out. could very easily disrupt and derail the CCIE journey. But my wife and I decided to stick it out, and she's been amazing throughout all of it. So I continue to push on. Another thing is, we had sold our house while I was going through the CCIE journey, and we started shopping for a house while I was going through the CCIE. So again, some more stuff to pile on there. Why do I bring that up? I bring that up because it's important to note that life doesn't stop. Just because you're going for a certification, or just because you're trying to do X or Y or whatever your plans are, life doesn't stop. It's going to keep going. You have to remain committed. As a friend of mine says, perseverance is key. Remaining on track and remaining positive and keeping your eyes on the goal. You absolutely have to do it. You're not going to get the certification if you can't do that. All right. So I go in and I take my first attempt and I get these lab results, and they are awful, right? And I take it this is in June. Right around that time, Cisco Live was going on right around that time, actually, of that year. And they had just announced some stuff, I think, about the CCIE, maybe some changes that were coming or something like that. I think they maybe announced that CCIE Collaboration V2 was coming. And so now I have that pressure as well, because I was like, oh man, like I need to get this done before they change everything. And then I have to start studying on a whole new topology. The other thing is, I left that exam realizing how close my lab was, my home lab, but also realizing how far off it was. So I went home and I just uninstalled. I went and got rid of all my virtual machines, reinstalled all of them, re-IP addressed everything, got everything set up to the point that I thought was good, and then took backups of it, because that was my backup that I was going to revert to. So what I would do is I'd go through and I'd lab everything up, and I would test it and I would verify it, and then I would go and restore backup so that I could start back at scratch, where my IMMP was integrated, my UCCX was integrated, but none of the configs were on there. All it was just simple, the bare minimum of what needed to be integrated, what was set up in the lab. So then I go back and start studying again and realizing what different study material brought me the most value. And so the study material that I had used some IP Expert, I had used some Collaboration 360, some Kevin Wallace stuff, some INE stuff, some CollabCert stuff. There might have been some other stuff out there, but I don't really remember. Now, what was really good about that was that IP Expert really had some stuff. Kevin Wallace, his stuff, I mean, he has a YouTube video about CCIE, the deal breaker or something like that, where he was talking about troubleshooting. That was key. Kevin Wallace has he had an approach to CUE that which is Cisco Unity Express, which I don't think any of the other instructors had the same approach as him. Most of the other instructors did it through the GUI, whereas Kevin Wallace did it through the CLI, and I liked that approach the most. I thought that was the most efficient way to do it, and so I did it that way. INE, there were a lot of questions I had, like why does this issue occur when I'm labbing things up, or what exactly does this command do, right? And I would be looking through it and I'd find some stuff out. There were some videos, some content with INE where they would fill in those gaps. They would provide some information that other instructors weren't providing. And the Collaboration 360 stuff had its own value that it brought to the table, but in terms of the CCIE collaboration, my own opinion, CollabCert with Vic Mulhey, hands down, was what I found to be the best material, the best instructor, the one who took me from failing the exam when I was getting to the point where I was failing the exam by only like 2 points, and I was having the most difficult time figuring out where are those 2 points. I feel like I'm doing everything 100% right. I don't get what I'm missing. Vic and his company were the ones that helped me, get that little bit extra of a push and actually become a CCIE. Going back a little bit, backtracking a little, I started out studying alone. And I think I studied alone for the first 7 months or so. Eventually, I got a study partner. And my learning went up immensely. Like, I started learning so much faster because I would hit an issue. There were times where I would hit an issue at like noon on a Saturday, and I would troubleshoot through the night. I just couldn't walk away from it. I would troubleshoot through the night until like noon the next day. And I have a particular feature in mind that I was troubleshooting, a particular configuration. I troubleshot for 24 hours straight, just hardcore troubleshooting on it, and found what my problem was. Whereas once I had a study partner, I could say, hey, I'm not getting this to work. It's driving me crazy. I can't figure it out. And then we'd hop on a meeting together, and they would take a quick look and say, hey, this is what you messed up. And they would learn a little bit, right? Because they get to troubleshoot my stuff. I would benefit because I'd have this discussion and I would learn, and it wouldn't cost me 24 hours. Like, that's pretty important. The other thing also is that I could say like, hey, I just learned this particular, like really one-off weird thing. You want to check it out? And they would say, oh man, like I was thinking about this, like it's so awesome, thanks for showing me. And same thing with them, like they would reach out and say, hey, have you ever seen this command? Have you ever heard of this command? I think it's a useful command. We should take a look into it. And having a study partner is just absolutely important. That's a huge deal. Also having a mentor. I remember one day driving home, and it was right after the exam, and I called up a buddy of mine who was the guy that I mentioned. He was the first one in our group that passed, and he passed well before I did, maybe 3 years before I ever did. I called him up, and we just started talking about it, and he was like, dude, I'm so happy you called me. I didn't even know you were going for the exam. And we just, he started talking to me. He was like, some people don't get it, like where you go in and you take the test, and you're like, man, the phones should have rung. I had everything set up, but the phone didn't ring. And for most people out there that aren't collaboration, they don't get it. They're like, okay, so like the phone didn't ring. Like, so what? Like it should have just rang. Like what all goes into that anyway? Whereas like we could understand it, and we could understand like how much that sucks to be in the lab environment and pick up the phone and dial the number and then just hear ding, 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 or hear like your phone, this call cannot be dialed, right? That sucks. That is the sound of failure. Like you need that phone to ring. That was a big thing. I remember being able to discuss that with him, and being able to discuss some of the difficulties that you're facing and how you feel about things, and having somebody to be able to say like, no, you got to keep going. But also he was very adamant about you have to schedule your next attempt. That was another big thing with him. Just like what I did with the CCNA, where I was failing and then I was having to come back and schedule the exam immediately. On my first attempt at the IE, I didn't schedule the exam immediately. I took a couple months, I think about 3 months, 2 or 3 months before scheduling it again. And then I got much closer. I got like, I think I failed the exam by probably like 2 points. So then when I failed that one, I immediately scheduled it again. You have to wait, I think 30 days. So that I have no idea what I'm doing wrong. Like, where are these 2 points? You start going crazy, like trying to find these 2 points, and you start just grasping for straws. Like it's just a thing. When you're going for the IE, you start just trying to figure out everywhere that you can find even just 1 point, and you start going crazy. It will make you go crazy. It's very hard. One thing I want to throw in here though is do not start blaming the proctor. I've mentored a few people that will blame the proctor, and they think that they're failing the exam because the proctor has some sort of issue with them and they're out to get them. And whatever it might be. But here's the problem. Once you start blaming other people for why you're failing the exam, you start basically saying, I'm doing everything 100% right. Everything is perfect. It's all correct. I should not be failing. I absolutely should be passing. At that point, you stop trying to look for those 1 point here, 1 point there, 2 points here. And you basically say that my config is 100% correct, and I'm going to go in there and I'm going to do the same config and I'm going to pass. It doesn't work that way. Don't blame other people. Just understand that you need to adjust. You need to adjust on your config, or you need to adjust on your troubleshooting, or whatever it might be. You just need to find that adjustment and get your points. That's huge. I think that was pretty much everything I wanted to cover, right? I talked about my study material. I talked about the hardships that I faced. I talked about the importance of having a study partner. I talked about, letting other people know that you're going to be bogged down in this and you're not going to be as readily available as you might want to be. I guess just one last thing that I'll say is that I remember at times where I'd be getting up at 5 in the morning or 5:30 in the morning after having studied to 12 at night or, 1 in the morning. And I just remember sitting there and wanting to stay in bed, not wanting to get out of bed. And, I'd kind of like roll over and lay down. And then like, as I'm sitting there laying down, I'd ask myself, how bad do you want it? And then I would just kind of slide out of the bed. I didn't even have the energy to like sit up and like, get out of the bed. I would just kind of almost like ooze my way out of the bed, like as if I was some sort of like an amoeba or something. And at the end of the day, that's really what it comes down to, is how bad do you want it? Are you willing to go get that CCIE? Are you willing to put in the time and the effort and study and lab things up and really, really, really get to the point where this is your life, right? Until you get that exam, that's your life. And, for any of those folks out there that are thinking about whether or not they want to do it, I mean, it's 100% achievable. You can do it. It's just, how bad do you want it? And, it was the first thing that I've ever really, truly sat down and contemplated quitting. 100%. It was I'd never really truly said like, I'm going to quit. Even when I was in like training for the military, I remember there were times where I was like, this sucks so bad. I don't want to be here. Why can't that tree just magically fall down and crush me? Like, I wasn't going to quit, but I was just thinking like, why can't this big boulder next to me just magically move like a couple feet over and break my leg so that I can leave this place without having to quit. The CCIE though, that was the first time that I sat down and actually thought, am I going to quit this? Is the juice worth the squeeze? Should I stop? Am I putting in too much time and effort and possibly not going to pass this? And in the end, my decision was that if I quit, I'm never going to be able to live it down. That every time I meet somebody who's a CCIE, in the back of my head, I'm going to be thinking, I was going to be a CCIE. I tried to be a CCIE. Stuff like that. I know it was something that would have always bothered me. It would have eaten me up. And then on top of that, I was constantly thinking about why I wanted my CCIE and how I was going to feel when I finally got the certification. Those were big things that helped drive me towards continuing and pushing and going until I finally passed. And then even then, after you pass, this is something that a buddy of mine brought up. You have to remember how to have fun again. Like, you have to remember how to dial it back a little bit and go and enjoy yourself. But again, it's absolutely doable. If you're thinking about going for the CCIE, or if you're actually already studying for the CCIE, just understand that it is absolutely, absolutely doable. People achieve it all the time. I don't know how many people pass a day or even a year, but There always will be people passing the exam. There will always be people going in and taking it and becoming CCIEs. Why can't it be you? How bad do you want it? Just go get it done. Anyway, with that's my CCIE journey. I hope that it benefits somebody out there. I hope that somebody can get some sort of value out of this. And for any of the other folks out there that are currently, going on their CCIE journey or that have done it in the past, please, share below, comment down below. Let us know. Let us know about, the hardships that you went through. How many attempts did it take you to get the exam?